This is Illustrator. Illustrator is a vector graphics editor. It allows you to do all the different things that a normal graphics editor would allow you to do, including building basic shapes and doing normal typography stuff, and then making crazy changes to your shapes and your typography stuff at a later point in time. That way, when you put it all together, it looks kind of cool and like you know, meant to do that on purpose, etc., etc. Illustrator can also be used for more advanced purposes, again, but everything always goes back to basic shapes, right? So if you look at this, we've got a couple basic shapes, rectangle, circle, and so forth. But when I combine those shapes together and then extrude that shape into three-dimensional space, I get things that look much more interesting. This is Adobe Dimension. Adobe Dimension is a 3D rendering and design software tool that allows you to create photorealistic images. It is particularly useful for creating mock-ups, product shots, packaging designs, and other 3D compositions. It itself is not a modeling tool per se. In other words, you don't really create your 3D models here. This is more of an arranger, you know, a composition. This is where you can set up your 3D models. This is After Effects. It is the industry standard software for motion effects and visual effects and motion graphics. You can manipulate footage, create complex composites, and animate anything from text to characters. You control keyframes, expressions, and all of the various effects, pre-built effects, to build sophisticated animations. Really quickly, to do a basic animation to show you how this application works, let's go in, do a new composition. Let's make it 1920 by 1080, and with a white background, what we'll do is we'll create a new layer, a new shape, and this will be a square. We'll set our square up so it's near the top of our frame, and what we'll do is we'll animate it so it goes from the top of the frame down to the bottom of the frame. Really, to do that, all we have to do is set our position, our initial position along the timeline, and you'll see when I do that, set our timeline here. When I set the position, you'll see a diamond come up. That diamond indicates a keyframe. Keyframe being a position, a certain point on the timeline, or a certain point on the screen. So now you can see I've moved the timeline up here to about 2 seconds, and I've shifted or actually moved the box down to the bottom, and by doing so, a new diamond shows up. That's a new keyframe. And very quickly, I've created an animation. It's basic, but it's an animation. And finally, this is Photoshop. Photoshop is your everyday graphics editor, and unless you've been living under a rock for the last 25-30 years, you know what Photoshop is. Now, Photoshop differs from Illustrator in that Photoshop is a raster editor. It can handle some vector elements, but primarily Photoshop is a raster editor. This means it works with images composed of pixels. So it has a different purpose than Illustrator. Generally, I'll use Illustrator for your like mechanical engineering type things, 3D model creation, and then I'll bring whatever I need to into Photoshop. For example, the skin. When I'm developing the skin of the 3D model, I'll do that in Photoshop. And this is Premiere Pro. the industry-leading video software, editing software for film, TV, and web. Very powerful tool that allows you to take raw footage and turn it into polished professional videos. It is used for video editing, audio editing, color correction, color grading, some motion graphics and effects, and also to export whatever video that project that you've got working on out to a great number of formats. So pretty much everything from your standard YouTube up to TV type broadcasting specifications. Premiere Pro can do it. And here we are back inside of Illustrator. And remember I said that Illustrator is a vector graphics editor. You use basic primitives, basic shapes, circles, squares, lines, things like that. Combine them into something that looks interesting and then call it art. No, just kidding. Well, halfway kidding. But as you can see here, we've got some basic shapes. A couple circles, a rectangle, another rectangle, and a couple lines that look like a chevron, right? All placed at curious locations. Curious locations being because I know what the measurements of this thing is that I'm trying to model here. In the end, once I have all these basic shapes, I will combine them and make them look like the object that I want them to look, at least from a 2D point of view. So this being a 3D project, of course, I'm going to say, well, let's take that 2D model and extrude it and make it into a 3D shape. And that's basically what I've done here. So you can see we've got a shape that is very similar to the above, but has been extruded and beveled at the top, and a couple other little modifications made to it, but basically we've got a 3D model. I'll end up exporting this from Illustrator into Dimension. It can be very simple like that, or it could be a more complex shape like this, where we actually have two different basic shapes, one composited to form a kind of like a see-through section of the latch there. And the artboards go on, and you get all kinds of different drawings. Ultimately, these are 3D drawings meant to be exported into Dimension. So let's go to Dimension next. So going back to Dimension, remember the drawing that I was just doing there? And how I said I would import that into Dimension. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. Give it the correct rotation. Let it fall down to the ground. Bring in the next piece. And we'll select both of them and well, won't select both of them yet. Now we'll select both of them, and we'll just do an alignment. Line top, bottom, and front. Screen just a little bit closer, and yeah, okay. So, as you can see, composition, 3D modeling composition. I'm not actually doing the modeling in this application. I'm just taking the models that I've developed elsewhere, pulling them into Dimension, and getting them set up. Set up into what, you might ask? Well, let's erase this, and swing the view around, and take a look at the entire model. Now, from Dimension, each one of these, by the way, is a different piece or series of pieces, and I'll export these from Dimension into After Effects. Alright, so now that we are in After Effects, these are, as you can tell, pretty much the same models that I was just working with in Dimension, the track and the duo walk. In After Effects, what I'll do is as I said, import the models into After Effects, place them in the positions that I want them, and then create movement that looks like an animation. In this case, I'm simply sending the model down, independently allowing that one piece to remain stationary when it quote-unquote hits the top of the track. And then I slide the whole contraption forward, and at one point that secondary piece clicks down in and locks. So just individual basic movements that create an animation that when played in full looks pretty seamless.